Aaliyah Johnson leaned her frame against the rough brick of her assigned alcove, watching the passages of Oakwood Academy slowly lose its population as learners ran to their awaited buses. Her loose-fitting jacket swallowed her slight form, the long sleeves shrouding digits that quivered softly as she struggled with her coded safe. Scarcely topping 5 feet with thick spectacles sliding constantly down her nose bridge, she'd trained herself to vanish in the lively hallways of one of Boston's most crowded schools. She'd moved to Oakwood 2 terms back after her stepfather took up a post at the neighboring engineering factory, leaving behind the known comfort of her intimate schooling in rural Vermont. Here, among over 3,000 scholars, Aaliyah felt like a shadow wandering the floors. Her intonation, still echoing the laid-back style of country talk, drew attention in ways she earnestly wished it wouldn't. Other learners appeared to carry an assurance she'd never found, their brand clothes and easy joking setting an unseen wall she couldn't scale. Unknown to any of them, Aaliyah had spent the last 7 years practicing judo under her grandmother's guidance back home. Grandma Beth, a former police academy trainer, had relocated to Vermont after retirement and had embraced teaching her timid granddaughter the ancient defensive moves. "In this existence, tiny fighter," she would explain during their sessions in her converted barn, "people will misjudge you due to your stature, your docile manner, your background, but that is their error, not your frailty." The skills felt useless here, nevertheless. Aaliyah had sworn to her mother she would lay low, concentrate on her lessons, and evade any trouble that might show badly on their family. Her parents had struggled too much to construct their new existence in Boston for her to endanger it with fighting, however reasonable it might appear. The first signal sounded, and Aaliyah hurried toward her advanced history lecture, clutching her binders tightly against her chest like metal plates. She slipped into her usual seat near the back wall, expecting to disappear into the grey walls of the lecture hall. That's when she sensed him watching her again. Cameron Walker sat 4 rows ahead, his solid back filling out his varsity jacket with the casual confidence of somebody who had never questioned his role in the world. His dark brown hair was deliberately messy, and his green eyes carried a calculating coolness that turned Aaliyah's insides. As the head pitcher of Oakwood's baseball team and offspring of a famous Boston banker, Cameron commanded respect and fear in equal measure from most scholars. Next to him sat his constant allies, Derek Schmidt, a scrawny brunette whose anxious chuckle frequently followed Cameron's spiteful words, and Kevin Bell, whose solid frame and lasting glare made him seem older than his schoolmates. Jointly, they formed an informal social order that seemed to run the public environment of Oakwood Academy. Aaliyah tried to focus on Mr. Harrison's talk about colonial laws, but she could feel their sights fixed on her. It had started light, hushed remarks about her clothes, her pronunciation, the way she sat alone in the gardens at midday. But over the past few weeks, their focus had grown more specific, more hurtful. "Yo, hayseed!" Cameron's voice cut through her concentration as learners began gathering their belongings. The insult he had given her stung each time, shrinking her family's rich history to a silly label. "Cool coat. Did you buy it at the church sale over on Elm Street?" Snickers spread around the lecture hall as other learners pretended not to hear while quietly loving the display. Aaliyah kept her sights down, cautiously putting her books in her pack with digits that threatened to tremble. "I'm talking to you," Cameron said louder now. "It's rude to ignore people. Didn't they teach manners where you grew up?" Mr. Harrison had already left for the faculty lounge, and the remaining learners filed out promptly, unwilling to get involved. Aaliyah rose to leave, but Derek blocked her direction while Kevin stepped to her other side. "Answer him," Derek said with that nervous chuckle. "He's just being pleasant." Aaliyah glanced up at Cameron, meeting his cold gaze for only a flash. "Excuse me," she stated softly, trying to step around them. "Excuse me." Cameron mimicked in a mocking accent. "Did anyone hear that? So proper. I bet you say thank you when people call you names, right?" "Leave me alone," Aaliyah managed, her voice hardly a whisper. "Or what?" Kevin stepped closer, and Aaliyah could smell the cheap aftershave he used to hide the odor of cigarettes. "You'll cry to your mummy? Oh wait, she's likely too busy scrubbing dishes to care." The remark about her mother sent a rush of anger through Aaliyah's chest, but she pushed it down. Her mother was a trained teacher who had given up a relaxed existence to begin over in a new area. She deserved better than to have her sacrifice mocked by these spoiled brats who had never worked for anything in their lives. "My mother is a teacher," Aaliyah said, instantly regretting the defensive tone in her voice. "Sure she is," Cameron laughed. "And my dad's the governor. Come on, men, let's let Hayseed get to her next lecture. Wouldn't want her to be late for basic math." They stepped aside with dramatic bows, and Aaliyah hurried past them, their jokes following her into the passage. She ran into the closest restroom and locked herself in a stall, finally allowing her digits to tremble as the adrenaline rushed through her system. This was her existence now. Every day brought new shames, new reasons to feel tiny and disliked. She thought about her grandmother's lessons, about the assurance that had filled her when she successfully blocked herself against bigger, more powerful fighters in the controlled area of her farm. But using those skills here would only support every stereotype they already assumed about her. The trend continued over the next weeks. In the dining hall, Cameron would walk past her table and, accidentally, knock her trays to the floor, forcing her to scramble around his boots to gather them while other learners pretended not to notice. In the passages, Derek would slam into her hard enough to send her stumbling, then apologize with mocking sincerity while Kevin snickered behind. The worst part wasn't the physical bullying, it was the way other learners looked past her when it happened. Teachers who might have stepped in turned away or suddenly became very engaged in their paperwork. Aaliyah began to realize that her suffering was simply the cost of keeping the public order that kept everyone else relaxed. But there was one positive light in the darkness of her days at Oakwood Academy. His name was Ethan Lee, and he sat beside her in advanced English. Ethan was unlike the other learners, quieter, more considerate, with kind sights behind rimless glasses and a smile that seemed genuine when he gave it. He played cello in the school band and wrote for the learner paper, interests that placed him outside the mainstream social groups but earned him a certain respect from teachers and brilliant learners. Ethan had been the first person at Oakwood to treat Aaliyah like a real person rather than a nuisance. He had offered to share his notes when she missed lecture due to a dental appointment, and their partnership on a project studying imagery in The Catcher in the Rye had uncovered a sharp intelligence and dry humor that made Aaliyah anticipate their talks. "You realize," Ethan said one midday as they worked together in the library, "you're likely the smartest person in that lecture, but you act like you're scared to let anyone see it." Aaliyah glanced around nervously, ensuring they weren't being overheard. "I just don't prefer attention." "There's a difference between not preferring attention and concealing your gift," Ethan said, unintentionally echoing the words her grandmother had used countless times. "You have ideas about these stories that none of us would have considered. You shouldn't degrade yourself because other people are threatened by intelligence." The way he stated it, with such casual acceptance of her value, made something warm bloom in Aaliyah's chest. For the first time since arriving at Oakwood, she felt like somebody saw her as she really was, rather than as a set of stereotypes and assumptions. Their friendship grew over shared meals in the library and walks to their buses after school. Ethan told her about his ambitions to study literature at Columbia, and Aaliyah found herself opening up about her passion for chemistry and her dream of becoming a science researcher. He never asked about her family's history or where she had lived before, treating her simply as Aaliyah rather than as an unusual wonder. It was likely inevitable that Cameron would eventually notice their friendship and find a way to weaponize it. The assault came on a Thursday in November, when the foliage outside Oakwood Academy had turned beautiful shades of red and orange. Aaliyah was walking from her alcove to meet Ethan for lunch, when she discovered herself surrounded in the stairwell between the first and second floors. Cameron, Derek, and Kevin had placed themselves strategically, Cameron on the top landing, the other two blocking her path up and down. "Well, well," Cameron said, his voice echoing in the empty stairwell. "Look who's been making allies. I heard Hayseed has been spending a lot of time with that cello geek." Ethan's a good person," Aaliyah said, trying to keep her voice steady. "Something you wouldn't understand." The words slipped out before she could stop them, and she instantly regretted the flash of resistance. Cameron's eyes tightened, and his casual meanness sharpened into something more focused. "A good person?" he repeated, taking a step down toward her. "Is that what you call it when he feels sorry for the weird country girl? Trust me, sweetheart, boys like Ethan don't actually like girls like you. They just feel guilty about how pitiful you are." "That's not true," Aaliyah said, but doubt crept into her voice despite herself. "Oh, it's completely true," Derek chimed in. "I heard him telling some men about his charity case, so touching how he's helping the helpless immigrant girl feel invited." Aaliyah knew they were lying, could see the planning behind their words, but the poison still found its mark. All her old fears rose to the surface, the fear that she was too different, too quiet, too foreign to deserve real friendship. "Leave me alone," she stated, trying to push past them. Kevin grabbed her arm, not hard enough to leave a mark, but firm enough to stop her movement. "We're just trying to help you understand reality, Hayseed. Save yourself some embarrassment." "Let go of me," Aaliyah said, and for the first time there was steel in her voice. Something in her tone made Kevin release her arm, but Cameron had heard it too. His eyes lit up with interest, like a hunter sensing wounded prey trying to show power. "Oh, she's got some fight in her," he said with a smile that held no warmth. "Maybe we've been too easy on you, Hayseed. Maybe you need a lesson in knowing your spot." He reached out and flicked her spectacles off her face. They clattered down the cement steps, one lens cracking against the corner of a stair. Aaliyah's world instantly blurred, making her feel even more vulnerable and exposed. "Oops," Cameron said with mocking sympathy. "Clumsy me." Aaliyah knelt to grab her spectacles, her digits trembling as she felt for the frames. When she stood up, wearing the broken spectacles that now sat crooked on her face, she discovered Ethan standing at the top of the stairwell. "What's happening here?" Ethan's voice carried an authority that surprised everyone, including Aaliyah. "Just having a talk with our friend Hayseed," Cameron said smoothly. "Nothing that involves you, cello boy." Ethan looked at Aaliyah's broken spectacles and her obvious distress, and his jaw tightened. "Aaliyah, are you all right?" The real care in his voice, the way he used her given name instead of the spiteful insult, made her want to cry. But it also made her feel something else, a fierce protectiveness for this kind person who was willing to stand up for her when no one else would. "She's fine," Kevin said, moving toward Ethan with obvious danger. "But you should mind your own business before you get injured." "Don't," Aaliyah stated quickly, stepping between them. The last thing she wanted was for Ethan to get hurt because of her. "Just go, Ethan. Please." Ethan looked like he wanted to argue, but something in her expression stopped him. "I'll see you in lecture," he said finally, holding her gaze for a flash, before unwillingly walking away. "Smart boy," Cameron said once Ethan was gone. "Smarter than his girlfriend, anyway." They left her alone in the stairwell then, their jokes echoing off the cement walls. Aaliyah sat down on the steps, holding her broken spectacles and trying to process what had just happened. The worst part wasn't the damage to her spectacles or even the embarrassment. It was the way they had used Ethan against her, had made her feel like her friendship with him was something shameful. That night, Aaliyah sat in her room staring at her device, Ethan's contact information on the screen. She wanted to call him, to explain, to apologize for telling him to leave. But Cameron's words echoed in her mind, poisoning every memory of their friendship with doubt and shame. The next few days passed in a blur of avoidance. Aaliyah took different directions through the school, ate lunch in empty areas instead of the library, and found excuses to skip the lectures she shared with Ethan. He tried to approach her several times, but she always found reasons to hurry away, unable to meet his confused and hurt expression. The bullying grew. Without Ethan's presence as a deterrent, Cameron and his friends grew bolder. They began following her between lectures, making loud remarks about her appearance and accent that other learners pretended not to hear. In chemistry lecture, they would request to be her lab partners and then sabotage her tests, forcing her to stay after school to redo the work. The breaking point came on a Friday midday in the school's central passage, during the chaos of dismissal, when hundreds of learners were running to their alcoves and trying to escape for the weekend. Aaliyah was walking toward the exit, her new spectacles, quickly purchased at a discount store, sliding down her nose when she saw Ethan ahead of her at his alcove. For a moment she considered changing direction, but something in his posture made her pause. His shoulders were slumped with exhaustion, and there was a loneliness in the way he cautiously packed his books that tugged at her heart. She realized that in trying to protect him from Cameron's focus, she had hurt him in a different way. She was so focused on Ethan that she didn't notice Cameron approaching from behind until it was too late. "Yo, hayseed," his voice cut through the passage noise like a knife. "I see you're still stalking Cello Boy. Didn't we tell you to stay away from him?" Aaliyah turned to face him, and her heart sank. Cameron wasn't alone. Derek and Kevin flanked him, but they had also brought reinforcements. Two other baseball players whose names she didn't know stood behind them, their bulk blocking her path to the exit. "I'm not stalking anyone," Aaliyah said, trying to keep her voice steady. "I'm just trying to leave." "See, that's the problem with your kind," Cameron said, his voice carrying clearly through the passage. Other learners were beginning to notice the clash, forming a loose circle around them like vultures gathering around roadkill. "You never know when you're not wanted." The racist undertone was obvious, and Aaliyah felt heat rise in her cheeks. Around them, learners pulled out their devices, sensing that something dramatic was about to happen. "You need to learn your spot," Derek added, encouraged by the audience, "and your spot isn't anywhere near normal people." Aaliyah looked around desperately for an adult, a teacher, anyone who might step in. But the passage was full of learners eagerly watching the show, their devices recording every moment for public media fame. The few adults visible in the distance were busy with their own talks, unaware of the clash unfolding just yards away. "What's the matter?" Kevin stepped closer, his bulk threatening in the restricted space. "Cat got your tongue, or do you only speak English when you're trying to impress your boyfriend?" The mention of Ethan made Aaliyah's digits clench into fists at her sides. She could feel her grandmother's lessons waking in her muscles, 7 years of control and skill begging to be unleashed. But she also heard her mother's voice, begging with her to avoid trouble, to think of their family's name. "Just leave me alone," she said, her voice smaller than she wanted. "Or what?" Cameron stepped in front of her, so close she could see the cold planning in his green eyes. "You'll run crying to your mommy? Oh wait, she's likely too busy cleaning offices to care." The spiteful jokes of the watching learners felt like physical blows, but Aaliyah forced herself to stay calm. She tried to step around him, but Derek moved to block her direction while Kevin closed in from the other side. "We're not done talking to you," Cameron said, and there was something different in his voice now, something darker and more dangerous. The audience was feeding his ego, making him want to put on a show. That's when Ethan's voice cut through the crowd. "Leave her alone, Cameron." The circle of learners parted to show Ethan standing just a few feet away, his cello case in one hand and his backpack slung over his shoulder. His face was pale but determined, and Aaliyah's heart clenched at the sight of him placing himself in danger for her sake. "Well, well," Cameron turned toward Ethan with a hunting smile. "Look who decided to play hero. How sweet." "I said leave her alone," Ethan repeated, his voice stronger now despite the obvious fear in his eyes. "And what are you going to do if I don't?" Cameron's question was marked by Derek and one of the other baseball players moving to flank Ethan. "Play us a sad song on your little cello." The crowd laughed at that, their meanness encouraged by the pack mentality that had taken hold. Aaliyah watched in terror as Ethan was surrounded, realizing that her worst fear was coming true. He was going to get hurt because of her. "Ethan, don't!" she called out, but her voice was lost in the noise of the crowd. Cameron reached out and knocked the cello case from Ethan's hand. It hit the floor with a sickening crack that made several learners flinch, but the laughter continued. Ethan knelt to check his instrument, and that's when Cameron made his move. "Oops," he said with mocking sympathy, then kicked the case across the passage where it slammed into a row of alcoves. "Hope that wasn't expensive." Ethan stood up slowly, his face flushed with anger and embarrassment. "That cello was my grandfather's," he said softly. "Was being the key word." Kevin laughed, moving closer to Ethan with obvious danger. Aaliyah felt something snap inside her chest. A cord that had been stretched too tight for too long finally reaching its breaking point. 7 years of lessons. 7 years of learning to protect herself and others. 7 years of being told she was stronger than she looked. All of it crystallized into a moment of perfect clarity. But it was what happened next that really broke her control. Cameron turned back to Aaliyah with a spiteful smile, his focus divided between two targets, making him careless and overconfident. "You know what, Hayseed? I think it's time you learned what happens when country trash doesn't know its spot." He reached out and grabbed the front of her jacket, the soft wool that her grandma had knitted for her as a farewell present when they moved to Boston. With a sharp pull, he tore the jacket open, buttons scattering across the passage floor as the fabric ripped down the front. The crowd gasped, devices capturing every moment as Aaliyah stood there in her torn jacket, exposed and shamed in front of half the school. But instead of the shame and loss Cameron expected to see, something else entirely filled Aaliyah's dark eyes. Pure, controlled rage. "Big mistake," she stated softly, her voice carrying a deadly calm that made several learners step back instinctively. Cameron was still laughing, still riding high on the adrenaline of public shame when Aaliyah moved. 7 years of judo lessons had taught her that the first strike was often the only one that mattered, and she put every bit of frustration, anger, and controlled power into the kick that caught Cameron in the chest. The pitcher folded in half, all the air driven from his lungs in a single gasping wheeze. But Aaliyah wasn't done. As he stumbled backward, she grabbed his varsity jacket and used his own movement against him, turning on her heel and sending him flying over Mrs. Davison's table that sat outside the vice principal's office. Cameron crashed into the chair behind the table, then toppled to the floor in a mess of limbs and scattered papers. The passage fell completely silent, except for the sound of his labored breathing as he struggled to realize what had just happened. Derek was the first to react, lunging toward Aaliyah with a wild swing that she avoided easily. Her grandmother's voice echoed in her mind as she caught his wrist, twisted, and used his own weight to send him stumbling into the alcoves with a metal crash that echoed through the stunned passage. Kevin and the other baseball players hesitated, their assurance shaken by the sight of their leader writhing on the floor. In that moment of uncertainty, Aaliyah stood in the middle of the circle, her torn jacket hanging open, but her posture radiating an assurance that none of them had ever seen before. "Anyone else?" she asked softly, her eyes scanning the faces of Cameron's friends. Kevin stepped forward, his size advantage obvious, but there was uncertainty in his movements now. He threw a clumsy punch that Aaliyah deflected with her forearm, then drove her elbow into his ribs with surgical accuracy. As he doubled over, she grabbed the back of his head and brought her knee up, stopping just short of his face. "I could break your nose right now," she stated, her voice calm and controlled. "But I'm not like you. I don't hurt people who are already beaten." She released him and stepped back, watching as he stumbled away from her with new respect and fear in his eyes. The other baseball players had already melted back into the crowd, unwilling to test themselves against somebody who had just dismantled their group's social order with surgical accuracy. Ethan had grabbed his cello case and was checking the damage to his grandfather's instrument, but his eyes were fixed on Aaliyah with something like awe. Around them, the crowd of learners watched in stunned silence, their devices still recording, but their spiteful jokes replaced by shocked whispers. Cameron finally managed to pull himself to his feet, using the table for support. His perfect hair was disheveled, his varsity jacket torn, and his face flushed with shame and rage. But when he looked at Aaliyah, something in her eyes made him take an involuntary step backward. "You're going to pay for this," he stated, but his voice lacked its usual assurance. "No," Aaliyah stated simply, "I'm not. And if you or your friends ever touch Ethan again, if you ever come near me again, if you ever even look at us wrong, I'll finish what I started here. Are we clear?" The threat was given with such calm certainty that even the watching learners felt a chill. This wasn't the scared, quiet girl they had been watching get tormented for months. This was somebody else entirely, somebody who commanded respect through power rather than demanding it through fear. Cameron looked around at his friends, seeking support, but found only uncertainty and fear. Derek was still leaning against the alcoves, holding his wrist and avoiding eye contact. Kevin had backed away completely, his earlier bravado replaced by real wariness. "This isn't over," Cameron stated finally, but the words sounded hollow, even to him. "Yes, it is," Aaliyah replied with complete certainty. "It's been over since the moment you decided I was weak because I chose not to fight back. That was your error, not my frailty." Principal Thompson arrived then, pushing through the crowd of learners with the stressed expression of somebody who had been summoned by urgent phone calls from multiple teachers. He took in the scene, the overturned table, the scattered papers, Cameron's disheveled appearance, and Aaliyah standing in the middle of it all with her torn jacket and calm demeanor. "My office," he stated simply. "All of you. Now." As they filed toward the principal's office, Aaliyah felt Ethan fall into step beside her. "Are you all right?" he asked softly. She looked at him, this kind person who had been willing to risk himself to defend her, and felt something warm and certain settle in her chest. "I am now," she stated. The administrative meeting that followed was surprisingly brief. Multiple learners had recorded the entire clash, and the videos clearly showed Cameron and his friends as the attackers. Aaliyah's actions were ruled as self-defense, though she received a formal warning about fighting on school grounds. Cameron, Derek, and Kevin were suspended for 3 days and removed from the baseball team pending a disciplinary review. More importantly, they were required to attend social training and write formal apologies to both Aaliyah and Ethan. But the real change happened in the passages and lecture halls of Oakwood Academy over the next weeks. Learners who had looked past Aaliyah for months now nodded respectfully when she passed. Teachers who had ignored the bullying suddenly seemed much more aware of their lecture hall dynamics. Cameron's attempt to rebuild his name failed spectacularly. His carefully built image as the untouchable golden boy had been broken in full view of his peers, and his friends were no longer eager to follow somebody who had been so completely shamed by the girl they had all dismissed. Most surprisingly, Cameron himself seemed changed by the experience. The spiteful arrogance that had marked his personality was replaced by a subdued uncertainty. He no longer held court in the dining hall or commanded the automatic respect of other learners. 2 weeks after the clash, he approached Aaliyah at her alcove during the morning rush. She tensed, ready for another fight, but his posture was different. Shoulders slumped, hands in his pockets, eyes focused on the floor. "I wanted to apologize," he stated softly, his voice barely audible above the passage noise. Aaliyah studied his face, looking for signs of deception or mockery, but found only real remorse and embarrassment. "I was wrong," he continued, "about everything. The way we treated you, the things we stated. It was wrong, and I'm sorry." It wasn't eloquent, and it couldn't undo months of torment, but there was something real in his awkward delivery that suggested real reflection rather than a coached response. "Apology accepted," Aaliyah stated simply. "But this doesn't mean we're allies, Cameron. It just means we don't have to be enemies." He nodded, realizing the boundary she was drawing. "I know. I needed you to realize that I realize I was wrong." As he walked away, Aaliyah felt a sense of closure she hadn't expected. The popular pitcher who had seemed so powerful and untouchable was just another insecure teenager, somebody who had built his identity on making others feel tiny because he was scared of his own inadequacies. Her friendship with Ethan grew into something more over the next months. Their shared experience had created a bond that went beyond mutual interests and similar personalities. They had seen each other at their most vulnerable and had chosen to protect one another, creating a foundation of trust that felt unshakable. On the last day of school, they sat together on the steps outside Oakwood Academy, watching younger learners run past with the excited energy of summer vacation beginning. "You realize," Ethan stated, cautiously adjusting the bridge on his repaired cello, "I always knew you were stronger than you pretended to be. I just didn't realize how much stronger." Aaliyah smiled, thinking of her grandmother's words about hidden power and the importance of choosing when to reveal it. "Sometimes the best defense is letting people misjudge you," she stated. "But sometimes you have to show them who you really are." "And who are you really?" Ethan asked, turning to face her with a smile that made her heart skip. She considered the question seriously, thinking about the quiet girl who had arrived at Oakwood Academy months ago, terrified and trying to disappear. That girl was still part of her, but she was no longer the whole story. "I'm somebody who knows the difference between being kind and being weak," she stated finally. "Somebody who understands that you can choose not to fight without being helpless. Somebody who realized that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is show mercy when you could choose revenge." Ethan nodded thoughtfully. "And somebody who can throw a baseball player over a table when he really deserves it." They laughed together at that, the sound carrying across the empty courtyard of Oakwood Academy. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. College applications, summer jobs, the complex task of figuring out who they wanted to become as adults. But today, sitting in the warm Boston sunshine with somebody who truly saw and valued her, Aaliyah felt like she had finally found her spot in the world. The torn jacket had been repaired, the broken spectacles replaced, and the scared girl who had walked these floors in silence had transformed into somebody who commanded respect through power tempered by wisdom. She had realized that standing up for yourself didn't require becoming cruel. That power was most meaningful when it was used to protect rather than to dominate. Most importantly, she had discovered that true strength wasn't about how hard you could hit or how well you could fight. It was about knowing when to show mercy, when to extend forgiveness, and when to choose understanding over vengeance. Those were the lessons that would serve her long after high school was just a memory, in whatever challenges existence might bring. 31,522 characters.